you so much for joining us today. My name is Josh Morrison, and I'm the director of the Future of Law Lab at the University of Toronto Faculty of Law. The Future of Law Lab is really our hub for all things relating to law, innovation, entrepreneurship, business, anything along those lines. Before we get this afternoon's program underway, I want to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it's been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. And today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. So that brings us to today. You may have heard of ChatGPT, Bing's AI chat that's gone rogue recently, Google AI. Pretty much if you visit any news site, you'll be inundated with articles discussing the pros, cons, and what ifs of artificial intelligence. Just yesterday, one of the leading articles in the New York Times had the headline, "The imminent danger of AI is the one we're not talking about." And so this is all on top of the explosion in machine learning, predictive algorithms, and analytics that we've all been learning so much about the last few years. Without a doubt, artificial intelligence is more mainstream than ever, which means that we'll need to grapple with how it fits within the justice system and with the provision of legal services. We're very fortunate that over our 2 sessions, we'll have the opportunity to hear from Dessislav Dobrev as we explore questions about the application of artificial intelligence to the practice of law, as well as the key governance and regulatory questions that we'll need to answer in order to be most prepared. Dessislav is a leading expert in artificial intelligence in the law and has spearheaded AI matters in both academia and practice. His recent book, Artificial Intelligence in the Law, a comprehensive guide for the legal profession, academia, and society, has been endorsed by high-profile academics, leading law practitioners, and global AI leaders. This timely volume is one of the first comprehensive studies of how AI will dramatically affect the law, both as a profession and a regulatory domain, hence the 2 different sessions that we're doing, as well as society at large. As an adjunct professor, Dessislav created and taught new school courses on AI at McGill Law School, has previously taught at Georgetown Law School, and has provided seminar on AIs at other leading institutions such as the Berkeley Center for Law and Technology and the New York Bar Association. He's currently practicing international law at the World Bank Group, where he's exposed to AI issues at the global level on a daily basis. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dessislav. Thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to hearing everything that you have to say.
Thank you very much, Josh. Good afternoon, and thank you to everyone for joining us today on this very exciting topic. As Josh said, the topic of AI is far-reaching and wide-ranging, so we will necessarily have to focus on certain aspects of it. Today, we'll examine 3 aspects: brief general overview of AI as a concept and its taxonomy, specific applications of AI in the practice of law and how AI can be customized to law, and the likely limitations of AI and the future skill sets of lawyers. Let me say a couple of things at the outset first. First, AI is, I think, having a twofold overarching impact on us lawyers. First, AI compels us to rethink the role of the lawyer as a professional in an AI-accelerated legal landscape. And second, it compels us to rethink the role of the law as a governance domain. What's the objective of the law in setting parameters or dealing with the social implications of AI? Today, we focus on the first question. In the next session, in 2 weeks, we will examine the latter. Second, we have to right away address the elephant in the virtual room, so to speak, generative pre-trained transformers of GPT. When I started working and teaching on this topic a few years ago, much was already happening. But I was looking at developments prospectively with a view to the future. I always expected, things to evolve quickly. For example, that legal chatbots will proliferate. But ChatGPT has somewhat exceeded expectations in terms of quality and in terms of timing. And we are still just at the beginning, and this is just a window into what is to come. Look at the trend in the next slide. Actually, the next, yeah. So the ChatGPT model was tested on MBE section of the bar exam. Look at the jump it has achieved in a matter of just a couple of years or so. People with years of post-secondary education and exam-specific training only answer about 68% of the questions correct The current version of GPT is able to achieve a correct rate about 50% for best prompt and achieve passing scores in, I think, evidence and tort sections. The model's top two choices are correct 71% of the time. And by the way, remember, this is a general chatbot. Imagine a legal chatbot trained not only on generic language, but on legal language, legal specific language, contracts, memos, briefs, treatises, papers, focusing on the nuances and intricacies of legal writing. And we already have actually an example from just a few days ago. I think the law firm of Allen and Overy announced collaboration with an open AI managed investment fund in the development of what they call Harvey AI, legal specific chatbot. So the issues are now moving on from, is it possible? Can it be done? How do we build it? To how do we operate it? How do we supervise it? What are the risks, benefits, implication? But one big caveat, I think it's important for all of us to remember. Despite all this progress, we should keep in mind that while these chatbots may be able to conceptually may be able to do many tasks, and they will likely do them better in the future, they do not have any conceptual understanding of what they're actually doing. They have no cognitive understanding. It's purely computational processing. That's why they're prone to what they call these hallucinations, not just being wrong, but making really stuff up and with confidence. So we'll see, this will prove a barrier in the future, and we'll see where that barrier exactly is situated. We don't know at this point. So let's now move to a general overview of AI. This slide shows just some examples of how ubiquitous AI already is. It's being used in criminal justice, in sentencing, in employment, recruiting, monitoring, or as in the latest news, even termination of employees, in self-driving cars, in healthcare, diagnostics, and so forth, in facial and emotional recognition. So as you can see, plenty of diverse uses in our lives already. A huge segment of AI use is in content. Until recently, mostly content micro-targeting, but now content moderation, and of course, the hot topic, content generation. In the next slide, now let's briefly talk about what we mean when we say AI. For me personally, the key to understanding AI is the so-called Polanis paradox. This means essentially humans know more than they can tell. But now machines are learning from their own examples, from examples without humans explaining exactly how to accomplish the task. And this is a wholly different approach to developing software, where a machine learns from examples rather than being programmed for a particular outcome. Now, again, important to remember, not every automation is AI. Automation would not reach the level of AI if there's no learning, recognizing patterns, or understanding the data. In the next slide, here is just some definitions of AI for illustrative purposes. They're not comprehensive, and in my view, having a formal, uniform definition is less important than understanding the concept. But from a historical perspective, it's important to know that AI is a general purpose technology, as it will have implications for a whole host of industries. Examples of previous technologies are, of course, steam engine, electricity, and the internet. In the next slide, we'll see the taxonomy of AI can be represented visually in the following graphic. Right? AI is the overarching field focusing on intelligent algorithm, whether or not it learns from data. Machine learning is a subfield of AI about algorithms that learn from data. Deep learning is a type of machine learning based on neural networks algorithms that use markedly larger data sets. And examples of deep learning are facial recognition and the large language models like GPT we just talked about. Expert systems, which is AI, but is not machine learning, are based on embedding decision tree approach into AI model to provide decision or recommendation, for example, medical diagnosis, rather than learning from data. Machine learning is generally divided into supervised learning and unsupervised learning. There's also something called reinforcement learning within machine learning. Supervised learning is the process of input and output mapping of the data. We'll give you some examples in a moment. In unsupervised learning, the machine algorithm explores the output without being given an explicit output explores the input without being given an explicit output variable and tries to infer patterns, it is challenging for machines to be unsupervised learners, unlike humans, who are much better unsupervised learners. So the prevalent mode today is supervised learning. The next slide really shows the three elements of AI supervised learning: data, algorithm, or the AI model, and the output. The main element is data. It's precisely why data protections, we'll talk about next time, are reaching into AI governance. And examples of data are, of course, numerous, but now, very importantly, they include things like inferences about who we are and predictions about what we would do based on our past history. So it's precisely this data and the mining of this data that fuels the AI revolution. And as you can see from the next slide, essentially the AI sequence is this: input A data, algorithm or AI model learns from the data and recognizes patterns, and then this leads to an output B, which can be used for all kinds of applications and purposes. Here are some examples of output mapping: to classify an email as a spam, text recognition, ad targeting, self-driving cars, and so forth. Okay, so now having laid out the foundation of the general overview of AI, let's turn to some specific applications of AI technology in the practice of law. In the next slide, this slide exactly. Here's just a sample list of the tasks and applications, and we'll examine the key ones. But before delving into this, just a brief important note that understanding AI, and that's from the next slide, is not simply optional for lawyers. It may in fact be mandatory to use in certain cases, and there will need to be, I think, some rethinking of the professional rules for lawyers to address the use of AI. So, for example, duty of competence, right? In certain contexts where the effects of AI are favorable, that may require AI to be used by lawyers. And in fact, the American Bar Association model rules of professional conduct require that lawyers be informed and up to date on the benefits and risks associated with AI technology. Duty to supervise. That's going to be key, particularly with respect to chatbots. Lawyers should oversee the outputs delivered by AI. This may include, for example, lawyers' involvement in testing AI models to monitor, let's say, margins of error and sort of assert qualitative control. Duty to communicate to clients, to disclose to clients the use potentially of AI in delivering the legal services, and of course, disclosure of the risk and benefits of that use. Duty of confidentiality is paramount, obviously, especially with respect to data that is being given to companies that are training and testing AI models. Conflict of interest issues, some novel issues will arise around that. For example, if you have a same AI provider supplies AI output or recommendations to two opposing parties in the same matter. So lots happening. In fact, just a few days ago, the ABA adopted the resolution 604, I think it's called the traceability rule, just calls on developers of AI to ensure the products and systems are subject to human oversight and control, and to ensure transparency. So just briefly, in the next slide, you'll see that the challenge with AI, any AI application really is customization to the industry, to the purpose for which AI is being built, right? This is the case in the legal field as well. So how do we customize AI for application of law and practice of law, sorry. There are a couple of components here. First is the feasibility analysis. It's technical diligence, right? Technical diligence to assess whether it's possible to build AI to solve a particular problem. Is there sufficient data to train the AI model? Is the data structured, labeled, organized? So this is technical diligence. Then there's the value add analysis, which is the business diligence. Does the AI solution add enough value and assist the legal and business activity? And then there's the measurability analysis. Is the AI model sufficiently accurate? And let me give you an example in legal diligence using AI. Suppose a tech company or a law firm is building an AI model to detect change of control provisions in thousands of contracts to assist in M&A due diligence. To train the model, the company would feed the system with various data parameters, multiple examples and forms of change of control provisions, contracts in which it appears, different places in the contract where it appears. The company would leave some of these contracts out of the training data set and use them to test. And when testing, it would be important to consider not just the false positives, but also the false negatives when we measure it. Did it miss any contracts with change of control clause? Two further points on this. First, training data set should be balanced. If you're building an AI model to predict if a court will find a violation, if you're feeding the model with 95% violation cases and only 5% non-violation cases, you are skewing the predictive model. So the balanced data set would not necessarily be 50-50, but should reflect the split in reality. Second, the comparison for the measure of success of AI should not necessarily be a coin toss, let's say above 50%. So for example, if a court or a judge rules in favor of the plaintiffs 60% of the time, then your guess that it would rule in favor of a plaintiff in a specific case would have 60% accuracy, even without using AI model. This is just to exemplify that AI has to be measured at least against already existing odds. In the next slide, as you'll see here, there are now increasing number of AI application in natural language processing, NLP. There's a spectrum of AI NLP approaches to legal language as well, for purposes, text classification, knowledge representation, argument mining, information extraction, retrieval, and so forth. Just one example here, and you see it in the next slide. AI has been used to detect potentially unfair contract provisions in contracts, like, for example, terms of use in online platforms. The machine learning is an AI-powered tool named Claudette. It's an abbreviation of clause detector tool. And in the next slide, you'll see the output of that tool. The tool processes and tags clauses for type and then for degrees of fairness. Then the tool is used to classify the provision by using NLP through machine learning, as you can see it here. And this is just an example. I mean, following this logic and this application, AI NLP can be used for a bunch of other options. For example, to score provisions, right? To detect deviations from standard market clauses, to rank friendliness of the provision to a certain party to the contract, let's say borrower or lender friendly. And in terms of NLP, I also point out examples like AI is currently being used to sift through communications evidence in investigations of alleged white-collar crimes, FCPA violations. Essentially, the AI is trained to detect potentially fraudulent communications, not only in email, but also in text messages. So that takes time to train the AI model to do all of these things. The other example of this use is using AI to alert a company, a law firm, of any new regulatory developments. The AI is essentially scanning online content, and as soon as some regulatory development occurs in a particular area or relevant to a particular company, it sends alerts. Okay, so in the next slide, let's talk a little bit about AI and legal research. After the analog and digital phases, we're now entering into a new phase of legal research. I call it AI legal research. There are several relevant capacities that are, I think, developing. First, AI can be taught to identify legal concepts, again, without understanding them, to identify them, and not merely to recognize words or terms. So this will empower more elaborate and targeted legal research that extend beyond simple keyword searches or Boolean searches. So AI is increasingly searching for the concept rather than the words which may appear at random if you train it properly. Second, not just searches, but actual responses generated to legal questions. And here, of course, we're talking about chatbots, in particular legal chatbots. With proper supervision, chatbots could be used to assist lawyers in legal research by scanning through large amounts of text and data, providing relevant information on a given topic. They could suggest arguments to make in a brief. They could provide an overview of an area of the law, and in fact, help with factual research. I think ChatGPT was used to develop a list of deposition questions for a plaintiff in a motor vehicle accident. So overall, the nature of AI in this area will likely evolve in the direction of content document generation, not just doing the research, but inputting the results of the research in a memo-like form or a brief or a contract from which a lawyer can start. So, and the use of legal chatbots and chatbots in general, I think, will grow in what I call the AI loop. The more questions users ask, the more data is created. The more data is available, the more answers can be anticipated and trained into the chatbot. And the more answers are enabled, this will attract more users, which will then ask more questions and create more data, and so on. Another stream of AI capabilities in the legal research has to do with processing case law to provide additional insights. And that's already happened. For example, AI may allow you to upload a document, such as a brief, and it will automatically check if the cases that are cited in the document are still good precedent or have been overturned. So additional kind of insight into legal documentation. And then finally, I think very importantly, another use of AI in the sphere of legal research will be, I think, the ability to insert your own facts and see how this would change the legal answers in relevant cases. This type of use would likely be in cases where there are a number of factors, out of which none is determinative on its own. So the AI would evaluate the relative weight of each factor based on machine learning of millions of precedents. And here's a hypothetical example. Whether a court would rule that a duty of care is breached in a specific set of facts. The facts can be classified into types, like, for example, specific set of facts for auto accidents can be the speed of the car, traffic light, and where is located the pedestrian, and so forth. So those are some of the uses of what I call the insert your own facts type of legal research. And the next slide, that's another use of AI in predicting, a very important use of AI in predicting outcomes of legal proceedings. Now, here, I think there are two segments of this use, the way I view it. One is judicial analytics, and the other one is substantive judicial prediction. Judicial analytics look more towards procedural or extrinsic aspects of a case to make a prediction about how a judge might rule in a particular lawsuit. The procedural aspects can be annotated in the precedents, in the training data set, which would be the variables, right, inputted into the AI model. And the name of the judge, the type of the case, parties, amount of damages granted, and so forth. The substantive judicial prediction, on the other hand, it tries to make prediction based on the substantive issues and questions of law and facts. AI would allow the user potentially to, as I said, to modify the facts and see how the predicted outcome may change. And we already looked at this in the legal research segment. So here, let's talk a little bit about judicial analytics. Again, to classify this, predictive AI models in judicial analytics are, in my view, two types. NLP of judgment-related text and extra-textual factors. I'll examine each of them. So one example of text-based judicial analytics is context judge analytics. So AI can be taught to predict what arguments and language in legal briefs and pleadings would be successful before a judge, before a specific judge, really, by sort of extrapolating from the language that the judge uses regularly in the judgments and granting or denying motions. In the next slide, you'll see there's another example of text-based judicial analytics, the way I call it. It's to look for language in something the court published on a case before an actual judgment is rendered. So let's illustrate this. AI was used to predict future judicial decisions of the European Court of Human Rights. In this experiment, the data from past precedents was split into what they call preliminary text of facts and arguments on the one hand, and the decisions on the other. Now, by feeding the machine learning model with the text of the facts and arguments, again, not the substantive, but purely as a text, as an NLP processing, the objective was to predict the decisions. Now, two important features of this particular court made this experiment feasible. First, the court, in fact, publishes text other than judgment in advance of the judgment, and obviously not every court does that. And the other important feature is that the decisions of the court are generally binary, with some exceptions, either violation or non-violation of the relevant convention. And in this experiment, the text of the facts and arguments used for training the AI was divided into n-grams of text, as an example here in this slide, to predict violation on violation or non-violation with each specified phrase as an n-gram, assign a predictive value towards the court finding violation, or non-violation, or in blue, or violation in red. So the AI model was tested to predict the outcome of actual cases of the court. And in the next slide, there's another method of judicial analytics, which is derived from factors extrinsic to the text of the judgment. Some of the metrics here would be, and I think I mentioned some of them, is what are the judge's previous rulings in such matters, the outcomes, the level of the court, the type of the case, the parties, the counsel. There could be really a vast number of variables one can teach the AI model on, including such things as, the month when the case was heard, even, or the time of day, to kind of find some pattern or prediction. So in addition to predicting potential outcomes of the case, there are other matters that could be predicted. How long the case would last? What's the likelihood of a settlement? What's the range of expected damages? What even law firm should a client hire by the success rate? And in the next slide, you will see some examples of what the output of the AI-driven analytics may look like. And one caveat here is this type of judicial analytics is a classic case of pattern recognition based on past behavior, right? It involves mining data in various cases and aggregating the data, but it's not driven by causation. So it's important to remember that. It's not necessarily connecting causally the predicted outcome to the features of the AI model. Like just because, for example, the judge rules 80% in favor of the plaintiff, where plaintiff is represented by a particular law firm, does not necessarily mean it's that law firm's representation that determines the outcome. So just a note of caution that this is about correlation, not causation. I think to finish on the point of judicial analytics, it's important to consider implications it may have for the administration of justice and society in general. I mean, it's a big topic, and many, and we probably can't get into them today. But some examples. Could this type of capacity potentially discourage frivolous claims and create incentives to settle early, or could it discourage the pursuit of legitimate rights and claims with the predictions of success are low? Could these tools be used by those who provide, let's say, third-party financing, litigation financing, or portfolio investors, to determine stock price if a public company is involved in a material lawsuit? So lots of uses and potential implications. And because of the potential implications, some jurisdictions are reacting through regulation. France, notable example is France. The French government amended, I think it was, an article in its Justice Reform Act to prohibit the use of data analytics on judges' behavior. And there are many issues with uncertainty with this provision, but it just shows the concern that's coming out of this. Just one other point on judicial analytics. We know that AI can exhibit bias, and we'll talk more about bias in the next session. But in this case, actually, AI can potentially detect bias or some other strange pattern. For example, let's say the machine learning model is given 100 variables, right? And one variable stands out very much. For example, the usual rate of success of defendants or law firms or whatever with a particular judge is, let's say, 60%. But whenever a particular defendant or a law firm appears, and it's not a small data sample, but it's happened a number of times, the rate of success jumps to, say, 95%. So could there be bias there? Could this be used to detect bias? It's a question to be explored. And then in the next slide, we'll just show another potential application of AI in practice of law. It's actually not potential, it's happening. It's increasingly used in contract review, issue spotting, and other due diligence items, right? So, for example, now in the news, we have the non-compete clauses, which are being discussed publicly. So if a company has thousands of employees and has thousands of employment contracts with them, it could use AI to review its existing employment contracts to detect these provisions, or, as we discussed earlier, to review change of control provisions in M&A diligence. So the output of AI may be at the dashboard that you see, it may look like this. And why is AI capable of doing that? Because there's an enormous amount of data digitally available in the form of past contracts, templates, forms. So it's very conducive to good AI processing. This data can be labeled in various ways: by type of contract, loan agreement, lease agreement, by type of contract provision, representation and warranty, covenant, termination, or by parts of a single provision, right? Chapeau, conditions, provisos. So based on that, AI actually can be and is being refined to operate at the level of technical concepts rather than just mere singular words or terms. And then the next slide, just finally, using AI in legal decision-making can take many forms and I think will proliferate. We'll talk more about this in the next session when we talk about legal governance, but let me just mention here, there's some recent examples, in sentencing. I mentioned this earlier, assessing the recidivism rate has been used, AI has been used to do that. Decisions in the immigration process, AI may be employed, and it is being employed to sort of judge whether an application is complete, whether the applicant should be designated as high risk, whether a marriage is bona fide, and so forth. So another example is actually just a few weeks ago, there is a chatbot called Do Not Pay that was going to be used to defend a case in open court, but I think this is California. But the state bar intervened, so that didn't happen for now. But there are other uses. I mean, essentially, it could be infinite. Potential uses are jury selection, assessment of credibility. I think there was a virtual border guard that was tested at airports, assessing whether travelers answer questions. AI is also starting to be used to pursue jury selection based on, again, inputted criteria and data. AI can analyze persons' facial expressions in real time, determine whether they have negative, positive, neutral feelings. And I think there are some applications of this currently that a law firm can then use those insights to figure out, what arguments will land well with potential jurors. So all of these uses raise serious, questions, whether it's ethical or whether it's for the benefit of the legal profession. So I think it really compels us to think about governance. And then briefly in the next slide, there are also uses of AI in the business of law. So in addition to using AI in substantive matters, AI can provide insight into the business of law. So AI is used in ranking and selection of counsel based on performance data. A company can outsource the management of its contracts to AI by essentially setting up an alert for upcoming dates, like when does the non-disclosure agreement expire. AI can be applied in law firm processes like billing, invoicing, and another uses that I came across is can be deployed in M&A to deliver intelligence of bidder behavior based on activity in the target data room. So before we switch to the next topic, maybe I may stop here and see if there are any questions that we can discuss. Josh, what do you think?
Yeah, we've got one question coming in from the audience right now that I can view at least. And this is from Dina, I believe. How should lawyers balance making sure the AI's research is accurate with actually relying on its outputs? Is the idea that over time we'll have more confidence in the outputs and reduce the need for the double checking work?
Yes, so this goes to the question of the duty to supervise, which I think we will have to seriously rethink and potentially amend our professional rules to do that. Because what happens is, if you're going to be checking all the output of AI and redoing the work yourself, then it will defeat the purpose of using AI. So what is the comfort that we would have of using AI, but supervising it to a sufficient degree where we can rely on its accuracy? And I think this is a good question. It will have to, I think, as AI, I think at this point, our duty to supervise will be higher because the quality output is not as good. As the quality rises and the measurability also rises, the accuracy rises, The duty of supervise may be lower. So I think it will depend on the accuracy of the AI. It will depend for what is being used. Next session, we'll talk about high-risk uses versus low-risk uses of AI. If AI is used for high-risk purpose, essentially determining sentencing in criminal proceedings, that is a very high-risk use. So we have to make sure that either the AI is accurate or it should not be used. If it's a kind of a lower risk area, like some financial impact, some stock price, some financial analysis, which those could also have high risk impact, but it could be less harmful than potentially the duty to supervise, but maybe different. So it will depend on the circumstances, but it will fluctuate in terms of the accuracy and quality of AI and the use and potential harmfulness that could come out of it.
And we've got one more on there, and I think it's actually a good one. It's one that I often hear from students, and with good reason, I think. What are the future job prospects of junior associates and articling students who are predominantly tasked with writing memos and researching for partners?
So I think maybe we can this is sort of the next segment that we could talk a little bit about that, if that's okay. I think this is sort of what I want to address in the latter part of this. So if maybe I can continue with the presentation, and hopefully this will answer the question. If not, we can come back to it. So I think now let's switch gears from AI applications in legal practice to lawyer skills, right? We now hear about how universities are grappling or adapting to ChatGPT because students, can use it for assignments, plagiarize, and so forth. But in my view, that is a tangential issue. I think the real issues for universities, and importantly law schools, is how do we prepare students for the future of work that is shaped by AI technology, right? And here I want to highlight two themes. I think first is a general observation on the future of the legal profession, and then second is a more specific look at the particular skills on which future lawyers should focus. On the future of the legal profession, I think that the short-term predictions about the impact of AI may be somewhat overstated, but the long-term predictions probably understated. So just let's bear in mind this dichotomy. The legal world may not fundamentally change in the next couple of years, but I would say by 2030, who knows exactly, but by 2030, many aspects I think will have been transformed. So I see several directions of impact, and how that affects our role as lawyers and students and articling students. So AI will change the substantive skills as well as, or have an impact on the substantive skills as well as on the delivery of legal services. In terms of substantive skills, I think there are two important implications here. There will be likely somewhat paradoxical but simultaneous shifts in the legal skill set of the future. On the one hand, I think a serious need is going to emerge for lawyers to complement their competencies with legal competencies with new technical skills or even entrepreneurial skills. Lawyers should be able to assess AI outputs for purposes of legal risk. They should be, in some respects, mini data scientists even, and legal professionals should develop the capacity to come up with AI solutions, and from a technical perspective to ensure that AI is trained and tested properly, that the input data is correct, and of course to understand and apply AI output in legal practice. So all of these technical skills I think are important. At the same time, strangely or paradoxically, you may say, some fundamental, traditional, non-technical skills will grow significantly in importance as they become, I think, irreplaceable core skills of what we call the human lawyer. I think this is strategy, being a trusted advisor to a larger view of business and legal issues, normative matters, ethics, stakeholder analysis, but more on that in a minute. In the delivery of legal services, I think there will be pressures towards what I would call a productization of legal knowledge. As we know, legal services and solutions have traditionally been provided on a one-to-one model, right? Legal memo is written for a specific case, and particular client, and now, can it be scaled towards other clients or cases? The pressures will be to develop one-to-many model, predict, legal solutions. And I think this is where AI will be vital in seeking to transform legal services into, you might call it even products capable of scaling, but we'll see to what extent that can happen. But that will be I think the trend, and is the trend. Now, I think the next slide this slide is sorry, previous, previous slide, sorry. Yeah, this one, perfect. This is I think is a critical slide. And here, some specific limitations of AI in the practice of law. Essentially, these are the areas where the competitive advantage, in my view, of the human lawyer will likely persist. I call it the human lawyer and the AI lawyer. You've noticed this already, but it may be, so I think it may be a good idea to keep honing these skills. So, for example, the limitation of AI will have in normative matters, in judgment. Normative advocacy will remain, I think, with the human lawyer, and even more prominently than before. So, making value-driven arguments not based on data, linear thinking, strict logic between cause and effect, but sort of arguments based on social values, on the balancing of conflicting and competing social interests. Those kinds of things will be limited for AI. And judgment. Judgment requires an ability to make a decision not solely really based on processing information, but based on non-informational inputs like previous human experience, right? Understanding of a wide range of human interests and incentives, and even intuition. Social context and strategic thinking. I think this will be absolutely key. Human lawyers will be better, hopefully will remain better at social and historical context, why is it important? Well, it can inform legislative intent, it can inform legislative context. In linguistic and cultural context, nuances, I think, will likely elude AI. And in reaction, I think we should enhance our own abilities to discern sort of these shades of gray. Another context-based skill is where the human lawyer should be better is stakeholder analysis. Stakeholder analysis, I think, is paramount in legal and business negotiations. And the human lawyer will continue to, I think, map out the stakeholders, their relationships, the chief influencers, who influences who, both personally, within institutions, decision makers in each entity, the personal dynamics between the people in negotiation tables, all of this stuff. And if the stakeholders are even spread across different jurisdictions, which we now obviously face more and more, it will be important to consider relevant geopolitical, cross-jurisdictional, cross-cultural aspects, which I think will be better than AI. I think AI will have difficulties with stakeholder analysis because it involves unpredictable human behavior. It involves reputational risks. It involves the assessment of long-term versus short-term relationships, gains. And AI will have difficulty in dealing with so-called irrational behavior, right? I think it generally assumes that actors behave rationally and within a known, out of predetermined set of rules, like chess, right? In chess, rules are limited, they're known, they stay the same, they do not change, the players remain the same, and they play by the rules. But these are not necessarily true in the human interactions with which lawyers are frequently faced in their practice. So is the capacity for strategic thinking. I think the ability to set normative parameters, to identify broad goals, what they call the art of making difficult choices, the capacity to recognize long-term trends. Overall, strategic thinking abilities are essential in the age of mass information, and it's even more essential to synthesize the most relevant aspects of vast amounts of information available to us in sort of achieving overarching objectives. It's going to be a critical, I think, limitation of AI, although, of course, it's already starting to encroach in some of these. But and then another set of limitations for AI where we can focus more, of course, is reasoning limitations. As we know, AI follows this strict path of logic, but it's really programmatic logic, code logic. It's not necessarily explanatory. AI has difficulty in providing, human-like rationale for the legal output. And this would require some reverse deciphering of the algorithm, which, is sort of the reverse of Polanyi's paradox. In a way, machines know more than they can tell us. And this is, of course, being addressed now. Everyone knows the big problems with XAI or explainable AI. So there's lots of initiatives technologically, normatively to try to address this. But I think overall, the limitations of AI on this will persist. And I think the ability of human lawyers to provide a clear rationale, explain legal decision-making, and those skills will be even more vital. And of course, creativity and originality, right? That's well known that I think AI may attain some levels of creativity. I think we've seen some of that with, for example, with DALL-E, the deep learning model that sort of, I think it was also developed by OpenAI to generate digital images from natural language. But I think true creativity and full originality, it is beyond AI's reach, at least for now. Why is that? Because AI is deriving its intelligence, if you will, or its acumen from an existing non-original data, right? So that comes back to us. So creativity in the field of law will be a capability, I think, a competency of great value. Now, I think there are two types of creativity, that are relevant here, originality that may be relevant here. I think one we addressed, the first is every lawyer should think creatively about how AI can be incorporated into their work. So we all have to educate ourselves about the capacities of AI that we talked about today and see if they can help us to provide better client services, to enhance access to justice. These are worthy goals. And the second, this is about really substantive legal creativity, right? I think law schools should more than ever, perhaps, structure curricula and coursework and teaching and grading methods to boost creative thinking among law students, right? Asking law students novel questions never before dealt with in jurisprudence is one way, or questions that would seek sort of argumentation not based on precedent, but based on the essence of law, legal principles, analogies, borrowing from systems, other systems of knowledge, new contextual interpretation, new ways of thinking about legal issues. Those are things that we should focus on in our study of law, but also practice. And then I think from a multi-layered legal analysis perspective, I think generally AI algorithms will tackle better, more linear tasks which are, I think, situated, if you will, on the same analytical plane, but it will be harder for AI to deal with interdisciplinary cross-connectivity issues, multi-layeredness of analysis. For example, legal analysis across multiple legal systems, right? Or fields of knowledge like comparative law, supranational legal frameworks. Those things will be somewhat more difficult, I think, for AI, and we can focus more on those competitive advantages we have. For example, the duty of good faith in both civil law and common law are very different, and it will be hard for AI to process rules that may appear to be similar or equivalent, but are treated differently. And just one other point on the features. I mean, we can talk about this obviously for a long time, but just one other point is, I think I alluded to this earlier, it's enhanced business acumen. I think lawyers will have to become more adept at developing business relationships rather than rely on reputation, be able to manage knowledge better, even to budget. And I think with deeper understanding of the business of law and not merely the substance of it, I think a lawyer would generally be better equipped to find those synergies and technological tools like AI to improve, the practice of law and the delivery of legal services. And then finally, I think this is just the final slide here is the next slide, which is the famous graphic created by Dr. Kai-Fu Lee, essentially placing different tasks and jobs on an axis of compassion and creativity. And he essentially suggests that it's precisely the empathy-intensive jobs that will be the ones to survive the AI wave. I mean, that's obviously a prediction. We don't know, but when AI begins to replace the more routine jobs, his argument, we need to focus our energies on creating more jobs that require empathy and compassion. like caretakers, teachers, social workers. So with that, I think the slides have, I've exhausted the slides and hopefully not the audience, but happy to address any specific questions. We still have a little bit of time left. So
yeah, we've got a number of questions coming in. Some are a little bit more related to regulation and governance. So we'll save that for the next session because you'll be talking in detail about that. But I'll bring them up. We're not going to have time to get to everything, but we'll do our best. So one individual in the audience is asking, how much will AI be used to deal with the law client? So I guess the client interaction piece.
Excellent question. So there are now new applications in this regard, in the sense AI chatbots are beginning to be used as a first interface with clients, and sort of to upload or receive or retrieve the first initial information by clients, which can then be sorted and provided in a friendly form to lawyers. So it has becoming more important, and I think one of the reasons for this is, and this goes to things like mental health chatbots. There is a certain proliferation of mental chatbots because some people feel more comfortable explaining sensitive issues and providing sensitive information to maybe not a human on the other side. So that application, I think, will get more proliferated, and but of course, we have to ensure confidentiality, right? So that's going to be a big issue, and we have to ensure that this will be a generic approach to clients, right? It's not going to be, you're not going to be able to have chatbots or AI applications that are tailored to each specific client. So there will be some limitations in that. But I think this is going to proliferate again, because it's an easy way to receive information, and also perhaps it provides some comfort to people on sensitive issues. But yeah, good question.
Then we have one up there. You've kind of touched on this from a fact-based perspective, but I'm curious. I think this one's asking for your opinion. In your opinion, could AI, an algorithm specifically, substitute the role of judge in the future?
To be honest with you, and that's already happened in some jurisdictions, I think in a limited way, in certain circumstances where you have and again, this is not now, but we're talking about the future, right? Prospectively, I think there may be cases in the future that are very repetitive, that are perhaps not as complicated. I mean, AI, everything with AI is going to first, let's start with things that are maybe not as important and not as complex. So to the extent you have, and that are repetitive. So to the extent there may be such instances like, again, this do not pay app, speeding ticket, right? Why not at some point have a robot judge, they call it, who processes essentially speeding tickets, disputes that are fairly repetitive, fairly standard, and perhaps, within particular small amount. So I think so. Now, when it comes to complicated issues that are high risk, that are potentially very harmful to individuals, and the risk is high, then, given the complexities of the world we're living in, I am not sure. However, that being said, that does not mean that a judge might not consider output from AI, right? And I think that's happened with this AI application of this called Compels, which essentially used AI to determine recidivism rate. So I guess it could be used as some input. Now, the question is how convincing is that? And are judges, when they receive output from like this, how much are they trusting it? How much are they checking it, right? That's the other thing, is because the issue with AI, I mean, there are many issues, but one of the things is, okay, it's coming from a machine, it must be right, and it's hard to check it. So is it determinative? I don't think it should be, but it could be. So for example, we'll talk next time, I mean, GDPR talks about no decision should be made based solely on automatic processing. But what does that mean? Solely based on automated? Does it mean a human just sort of rubber stamps it? Oh yeah, it looks good. Or do you get into how the algorithm works and what the relative weights are? So yeah, but I think at some point in the future, yes, it will probably happen in smaller risk cases, repetitive, less complicated.
So I'm going to do my best to combine two questions into one, because I think this is a little bit interesting. So they're really asking about, are there courses or programs that you can recommend to learn more about this? And also kind of what content are you consuming to stay up to date on AI and its application in the law?
Well, first thing is, I think my book is a great starting point. No, of course, I'm joking, but the problem with staying up to date is really that AI is, as I said, a general purpose technology. So it essentially affects all aspects of life. It's not, I mean, it could be administrative law, criminal law, human rights, contract law, we talked about use of. So it's difficult to really keep up to date on things that are happening in multiple areas. I mean, you know, obviously almost every on a daily basis, I would look at the news. I would do a general search, and I haven't used ChatGPT yet to give me advice on latest updates, but that's obviously one option. I think with the search engine being, I don't know if I want to call it replaced, but let's see what happens with that. You know, I don't know. I can't think about one way to do it, but if you are in law school, I think it is absolutely critical to pay attention to this stuff, whether it's technologically, you know, and the future of Law Lab, obviously it's focused on that. And I think it's absolutely imperative that we keep up to date on both the capacity of AI to be used as, you know, in the practice of law, but also generally speaking about the implications of AI in our lives. So not one single source, unfortunately. We're going to have to, with this particular technology, it's so varied and it's so diverse and it's so wide-ranging that we're going to have to look at, even in sort of uncomfortable areas that we don't know necessarily that much. Like, I'm not a criminal lawyer, but I have to, you know, keep up to date on this, how this is being used there. So, yeah, I hope that answers to some degree, but it's not a satisfactory answer, I know.
Well, I think we're just about out of time right now. So I'll use this opportunity again to do the full plug that you did not really do for yourself. And that's, if you're really interested in this type of content, please check out Desislav's book. It's fantastic. It goes in depth on all of the things that we're talking about this session. And also, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention our next session, which is going to be scheduled in 2 weeks from now. So that is Tuesday, March 14th at the same time from 12 to 1. And that's when we're going to focus more on the regulation policy development around AI and the law. So with that, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been an unbelievable session. And Desislav, thank you so much for your time, your insights, and really just kind of bringing a level of accessibility to something that for some of us may have been intimidating from the beginning.
Thank you so much, Josh. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to the next session.